Hi. So let us, so I'm working off of basically two computers here. Okay. So what we want to do today, we're going to continue our discussion with Microsoft Excel. We're going to talk about, let me zoom in here just a little bit. Now I've got Word here. This is not Excel. I've got Word here. We're going to talk about charts. I will use the terms charts and graphs interchangeably, just fair warning. This is the way I like to think about it is if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a chart or a graph is worth at least 1,000 data points, if not an infinite number of data points. Um, Charts and graphs allow us to visually display and communicate information, mathematical information in a graphical format. So it's really kind of our goal today is get you, Microsoft Excel does some really nice graphs in very simple, easy to use, user-friendly fashion. And so that's going to be our goal. We're going to talk about three chart types today. The first one is going to be the scatter chart, which is often called the XY chart. Okay, so the scatter chart, and what this does is this basically displays what's called values versus other values. Now, what that means, when Excel is asking for values, it's asking for numbers. So we try to not give it, if it's asking for values, we try to not give it text. I'll zoom in just a little bit here. Now, so again, we're engineers, so numbers are just numbers to us unless you put units on them. Units are incredibly important. So if we're going to measure something, we need to label the appropriate units so we know how it's being measured. Here we're just going to measure time. We'll measure time in seconds. So I'm going to put in here 1, enter, 2, enter, 3, enter. And last time we introduced Excel and we talked about the fill function. We said, well, if you'll highlight a group of cells, then you can just grab the fill function down here and fill that in. I'm going to go down to 15 or so. So I've got time in seconds measured 1 to 15 here. And basically I'm making up some data, if you will. I need data in order to be able to draw a chart or create a chart or a graph. So I'm generating, just kind of making up some data as we go. So the next thing we might measure, I don't know, might be something like, let's say, speed. Let's measure speed in units of feet per second. And then the next one might be distance. Let's measure distance in units of feet. And the last one, we're going to measure temperature. Right? And we're going to measure temperature in, I'm going to use degrees Fahrenheit. There's a number of ways you can get a degree symbol. One of the easiest ways I know is to put in a lowercase o and then a capital F. It's not the perfect way to get a degree symbol, but here's what you can do with that. That's not all we have to do. We need to superscript this lowercase o. So I'm going to get in there and highlight that lowercase o. Up here, you've got your font window. Sometimes the superscript option will be one of these buttons in here, but if it's not, you can just click on that little icon there and check the box for superscript and hit OK. And now I've superscripted a lowercase o. Now I'm going to measure speed in feet per second. So I'm going to say this is equal to, we'll just use a formula here. We'll keep this one pretty simple. Let's just say it's going to be, I don't know, 2 times whatever the time value is. So I'll just grab this value to the left there. I'm going to hit enter. Excuse me. Now again, last time we talked about relative references. I've given this a relative reference. That's my formula. That's my pattern. I don't have to give it 2 or 3 copies of that. But again, this is a relative reference. I'm saying multiply 2 to the value 1 position left relative to your current location. That's a relative reference. I'm going to fill that formula down, and every one of these then is going to be 2 multiplied by the value to the left. All right. Next one. So just kind of a quick review of what we did last time there. The next one, we're going to say this is equal to, I'm just going to take the time value squared. So time value raised to the power of 2, time value squared. And then that's my formula. That'll be just fine. I'm going to fill that down. No dollar signs needed. I want those values to be able to move as I move the position. All right, in the last column, I'm going to just kind of randomly type in some temperature values. They're going to increase as we go. I roughly a linear increase, but I don't want it exactly linear. And I'll show you why as we get there. So I'm just going to start at maybe, I don't know, 60 or so. And then let's say it goes up pretty fast at first. Let's say 65, 70, and then maybe it starts to level off. We'll say 73, 75, 77, 78, 79, 80, maybe it picks back up a bit, 82, 85, and 86, 87, 88. We'll say 9. Okay, again, just making these numbers up. I don't have any grand formula. I'm trying to follow there, just trying to increase them as we go. Okay, now here's the thing. When you go to insert a chart, how you do that is you go up here to insert. And under insert then you've got, there's a block over here for charts. All right, so this block over here for charts, and you can hover over these and these tell you a little bit about what kind of charts we've got there. Now, as we said, we're going to talk about the scatter chart. The first chart we're going to talk about is the scatter chart, the XY chart. That's going to display values or numbers versus numbers. So if I insert and you hover over it, it gives you a description there. I'm going to insert a scatter chart and watch what it does. It says, oh, hey, I found all this data. You want to graph all this data, right? Sorry, I'm getting in my refrigerator there. I need something to drink. I'm about to lose my voice. Okay. All right, let's continue. I apologize. Notice what it did. As I said, it just grabbed every data point it could possibly find and said, oh, Steve, you want to graph all of those? No, I do not. I don't want all of this in one graph. I want to graph all of it, but we're going to put it in at least 2 different graphs. I'm just going to put some, notice the chart is selected right now. I'm just going to push the delete key and that gets rid of it. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how to build the chart exactly the way you want. So I'm going to put my cursor over here where there's no data. There's nothing for this, for Excel to grab onto and cram everything into one chart. And if I do that, if I insert from this location over here off to the side, I'm going to insert a chart, a scatter chart there. And so I'm just going to grab this first option. You can play with the other options. I'm just going to stick with this first one. And see what it does. It's given me just a blank slate now that I can use to create my chart. It does not know what to put in there, and that's fine. I don't mind that. I don't mind telling it exactly what I want because it's pretty easy to do. So let's go through that process. Now, one thing to mention, notice while the chart is selected, if you come up here to the ribbon, you've got chart tools right now, right? If I don't have the chart selected, those tools went away. Right? There's a couple of tabs there that just went away. So if I click on the chart, notice they come back up. Under chart tools, I've got an option for design and an option for format. I'm going to, under design, what I want to do is I want to select data. There's no data in my chart right now. I need to tell it what data I want to put in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a series. Why do I want to add a series? Well, a series is a collection of values, X and Y values, for display. In the case of a scatter chart, it's XY values. It's a little different in other charts, but for a scatter chart, it's a collection of XY values. We just need to tell it what those XY values are. So I'm going to hit add here. I'm going to add a series to my legend, to my chart in this case. In this chart, I'm gonna do 2 different charts. In this chart, I'm gonna have 2 series in this chart. One of those series is going to be the speed values. So this one's going to be, we're just gonna type in here the word speed. Now I could select this cell that contains the word speed here. And the advantage if I do that is anytime the value, the contents of this cell changes, what gets displayed on the chart changes. The name of this series is based on whatever's in that cell up there. If I do that, I'm not doing that in this case. I've done what's called hard coding a value. I typed the word speed in there. So no matter what happens to my data later, this is always going to display speed as the series name. Anyway, let's not get too lost in that. Let's talk about the values. See, it says X values and series Y values. Again, if it's wanting values, Excel is asking for numbers. We try to avoid giving it text in this case because it'll do different things, but probably not what we want if we give it text. If it's asking for values, let's give it numbers. Now, what do we put on the X and Y axis in this case? Well, as you get further along in your engineering curriculum, you'll have more science courses, you'll have some calculus, you will have talked about what are independent versus dependent variables. You know, the study of calculus is looking at functions and how does the dependent variable change based on the independent variable. And if that's all gibberish to you right now, that's okay. You're going to get there. Right now, the good news is for this assignment, I'm going to tell you, put these numbers on the x-axis, these numbers on the y-axis. And if you've had any of this coursework, you'll be able to look at it and say, yeah, Steve, the speed is the dependent variable, so that's going to go on the y-axis. But again, if you don't have that background, it's not required. So let's do this. So again, see, it's asking for the x value. So I'm going to push this button here. And again, once values, so I'm going to highlight the numbers. What we're going to do is, because the speed values are dependent on the independent time values. So we're going to put the x values are going to be my independent. Okay. So I'm putting on here the time values. I think I might have lost a little audio there. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to put the time values in the x values block. And come on, man. Mouse didn't want to move for me. And then for the y values, this is the speed series. The values, it's asking for numbers, so I'm going to give it the numbers now for speed. Okay. Now, I'm going through this kind of slow. Once you get used to this, you'll be able to go through this pretty quickly. You can see what it's doing in the chart there when I hit OK. And we move this out of the way so you can see what the chart is doing. All right, it's updating as we go. Now again, I'm going to add two series to this. I'm going to have a second series. I want to display two series on this one. Speed is one. I want to add the second one, and this one is going to be distance. So I'm going to put distance and speed in the same chart. Now, distance is also dependent on the time values. So my x values is going to be time. Again, I'm going to tell you in your assignment today, put these values on the x-axis, put these values on the y-axis. But here I'm just going to highlight the values, the numbers for time. That's going to go on my x-axis. And then the values on the y-axis, this is the distance series. So the y values and distance are going to be the distance values. And notice what happens to my chart as I hit OK here. It updates the chart. Now that's, and we'll look at that. We'll look at the chart in a second, but that's all I have to do at this point. I'm just going to hit OK. That's about all I can do to the data. So I'm going to close the Edit Data window there. Now here's the thing about charts and graphs is if they cannot stand alone, right? If we cover up our data table here, we just look at the chart. If the chart itself cannot stand alone on its own, you have wasted your time, but more importantly, you've wasted the viewer's time. Okay? Somebody should be able to look at just your chart alone and be able to know everything that's going on here, anything that's relevant. Most importantly is, again, for us as engineers, we've got to label if there's any units associated with these numbers, we've got to make sure those are very clear. What units is this being measured in? Here, we can't even tell what's being measured or what this chart even means. Again, it's just kind of a waste right now. Let's make it to where it's not a waste. So again, if you select the chart, tools will pop up here where you can modify the chart. Now, over here to the far left, under the Design tab, is a button that says Add Chart Elements. And you've got all these options of different elements you can add to the chart. We could turn things on one at a time. We know we're going to need an axis title, so I could turn on primary horizontal axis title, and we could turn on each of these one at a time. What I might suggest you explore is under these quick layouts. This quick layout one normally gets you started with just kind of a nice fundamental chart, but you're welcome to explore the others here. Okay, but I'm just going to stick with this quick layout one. And if this were some kind of an experiment where we measured some kind of electric car and we measured its speed and distance and temperature, we would say that here, but we don't really know what this is for. So we're just going to keep this kind of generic. We're going to say distance and speed versus time. Okay, and now down here on the x-axis, that one's pretty easy to do. Let's just do it and say, well, this is time. We put time on the x-axis, that's being measured in seconds. Now the y-axis gets a little trickier. What do we do with that y-axis? Well, I could type out both speed and distance and put units on those. That would be okay, but here's what I would suggest to you. We talked about dimensions and units, right? Notice that the speed is a different dimension than the distance is. Right? The speed and distance are different dimensions. They're measured differently. It would be nice if I could measure them on a different scale. Right? Notice how big these distance values are in comparison to the speed. You really can't see what's going on with the speed because they're just getting squashed by these huge distance values. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on, you can select just about anything in this chart. And most likely if I can select it, if you right click, all right, so if you haven't learned in a Windows environment, this right click pulls up this awesome menu with all these different things that you can modify, change, or do to it. In Excel, the bottom option is typically format whatever you have selected. In this case, it's a data series. So if I format the data series, that brings up this window over here on the right. And because I have more than one series, notice what pops up. It asks, hey, do you want to move this to another axis? Yes, I would actually. And notice what it does to the chart. So now the distance values, the orange ones, that appears orange to me, it's now measuring those over here on this right axis, whereas the speed values are still being measured because I left those on the primary axis. The speed values are now being measured over here on the left. They're both being measured over the same x-axis, the same time scale. But now I've got two different looks at this. Now I need to be able to label this axis. So I need to add that. So let's go up here and manually add that. Under Add Chart Element, that is an axis title. And that is that's a secondary vertical axis title. So see what it does there when I click on that. That adds a secondary vertical axis type. All right, let's modify now. Now it's kind of weird to select vertical text on these, okay? But you get used to it after a bit. This one, we're going to measure, I left the speed over here on the left. So that's going to be measured in feet per second. Again, charts are wrong as far as I'm concerned if you don't put appropriate units on it. Just like a final answer, it's going to be wrong if you don't put appropriate units on it. So let's just be clear what's being measured there. On this axis, we move the distance over here. So we're measuring distance in feet, right? Okay. Now you can do about whatever you want to this chart after this. I learned, I had an instructor that always taught us, grab this legend. Don't leave all this white space over here. Grab this legend and drag it into somewhere into your chart area where it's not going to mess with what you're doing, okay, where it's out of the way. And then you can select what's called the plot area here, and you can resize that. And basically, you're not wasting all this real estate over to the right this way. You can kind of stretch your data out. You can see it better. You can see more of what's going on. But really, anything you do to this chart at this point is up to you. If I format the plot area here, it'll bring up the window over here, and I can change how the plot area looks. Right now, it's if I go to fill, and right now it's just in either a no fill or it's blank. If older versions of Excel would have used a kind of a gray background color, if you like that, you can for it. Get in here. I always tell people, get in here and get your hands dirty with the format menu. And if it's not over there on the right, just right click on something and it'll bring it up over here. But, for example, if you wanted to, and my zoom here is covering up some of my options here, but I think it looks like, yeah, so it looks like, let's say you don't like the orange circles. Well, you can go in here and just kind of dig in the format menu, and there's going to be somewhere where if you want to use triangles, you can use triangles. And if you don't like the orange color, maybe you want to do, I don't know, some kind of a red color. It's your chart. You do what you want with it. As long as it's labeled and somebody can look at it without looking at your data and understand what you're trying to do and say, then that's okay. After that, you can kind of dress it up however you would like to. Okay? All right, now I'm going to move this chart out of my way. Right? And here's where I would ask for questions. And of course, you guys are watching this as a recording, so you'll have to manually ask me questions through email or something like that. All right. Now, this chart I'm okay with. We're going to leave it where it's at. Let us then make another chart. So I've got 3 sets of data basically here. Let's make a chart of just the 4th one. So again, I'm going to put my cursor over here where there's nothing going on. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because A, you can rewind it. B, I've already gone through it once, but I'm going to go through this one pretty quick. I'm going to, again, insert a scatter chart. Since my cursor was over there where there is no data, it had no data to grab onto, so it doesn't really know what I want to graph. I'm going to move this over so I can see my data. I can right click and go to select data, or up here in the chart tools, there's an option to select data. Again, I'm going to add a series. Now this one's only going to have 1 series. Okay, you can name it if you like. A lot of times if you only have 1 series, you probably wouldn't even need to name it. And again, I'm going to go pretty quick here. But this is going to be a temperature series. Again, the X values, that's the numbers. The temperature appears to be dependent on time. So on the X-axis, I'm going to put the time numbers and the X values blank. And for the temperature values, it wants the numbers. This is the temperature series. So the temperature values, the Y values, are going to be the temperature values. Okay. And that gets us. And that I'm just going to put 1 series in this chart. So I'm going to hit OK. And again, you can turn on the labels and the axis titles individually if you like. I'm just going to turn them all. Or I'm just going to start with the quick layout one. You don't have to, but that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things we can do to this. First and foremost, let's take care of business, and let's put all my axis titles. Let's make sure those are correct. This is going to be time. Ooh, missed that A there. Right. This is going to be time. Time is going to get measured in seconds. And over here, this is going to be temperature. Temperature is going to get measured in degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's kind of weird to select vertical text, but I'm going to get that lowercase o. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. Yes. So when I want to modify font or text, I'm looking for that font option. But if I went to format axis title with some text selected, I would probably get something like this. What I'm wanting to do is somewhere where I can get in here and change that lowercase o to a superscript. Again, that's not the only way to do a degree symbol, but for me, a superscripted lowercase o looks an awful lot like a degree symbol. So that's normally what I do to get that. So now here's a question. What do you think? Do I need to quit scrolling? There we go. All right. Do I need this legend? Is that helping me at all? I would suggest it's not. If you select it, you hit the delete key, it will go away. It's like, oh no, Steve, I want the legend. How do you get it back? Well, you go back up to add chart element, and you get an option down here for legend. You can turn it back on or off. Right now, we've just turned it to none, and that's okay. Now, what else can we do? Well, there's a couple of things. One is, notice there's all this white space down here, right? Maybe I don't want to display that white space. Maybe I do. Maybe I want to show, hey, there's not a lot of temperature change. It's a pretty small change. Or maybe I really want to highlight how big that change actually is. What I can do is I can change the way this axis displays. So notice what happens when I click on one of these numbers. It selects the whole axis. I can right-click and format the axis. Right? And now, so over here in the Format Axis options, notice I don't have any numbers below 60, so if I set this to 50, I can't quite see what I'm doing there on the screen, so let's see. There we go. Okay, that makes more sense. I set it to like 500, right? If I set that to 50, yeah, so if I set that to 50, notice what it does there. Okay, so again, I didn't have any values below 60, so I set my minimum on that axis to 50, and now I can display more of the data. You basically zoom in on the chart, if you will. Now, you can use this one of two ways. You can either use it to really show off what's going on and zoom into the data. You can also use this to mislead people. If you want to show and say, hey, look, this 90 point up here is like twice as big or almost 3 times as big as this 60 point, until you realize, no, it's not that big. But see how much higher this one looks because we've changed the scale, right? So just be aware of that, and just be aware that you can use that to your advantage or disadvantage. But anyway, that's one thing we could do. We could do a couple other things and make this chart look any way you like. But one thing I'm going to show you here is there's a really cool option when you've got data like this that's kind of random, but it appears to be following some kind of a trend. You can try to track that trend and maybe even predict it or describe it. So if I click on one of these data points and I right-click it, you've got an option in here to add trend line. And there's other ways you can do that, but that's the fastest way I know. And see what it did there. It put in a line that basically it says this line appears to be the best fit for your data. Okay. The line's okay, but it really doesn't do much for you. What you really want is, if you scroll down this box over here on the right, notice there's 2 boxes down here at the bottom. One is display equation on chart, and the other one is display the R squared value. So when you insert a trend line, always, always, always put those in there. Okay. The line itself really doesn't help you much. This is really what you're after, is this equation and this R squared value. Now, I'm going to move this over, although it's going to change my format window. There we go. So I should be able to go back and click on this line. Yeah, so that brings us back. So what this is saying is, let's say I wanted to know what is the temperature going to be at 8.5 seconds. Well, I could plug in 8.5 here for my X, compute Y, and that'll give me a good approximation for what my temperature at 8.5 seconds would be. Or maybe I want to know what's the temperature going to be at 20 seconds. I could use this to extrapolate. And so if I plug 20 in here, this would give me an estimate of what the temperature might be at 20 seconds, although that's kind of dangerous to go outside of your data. It's really, you really should try to avoid that. But you'll have other courses later where they talk about doing these kind of things. Okay. What else we got here? I'm sorry, I was looking on my computer to make sure I had not done this whole thing muted. It does not appear I have. So here we go. We've got, so we've got an equation, and we also have this R squared value, which I just said, just check it, and let's talk about what that does. That roughly, if I'm oversimplifying, now the statisticians of the world that are watching this YouTube video, please do not send me your messages. I understand I'm oversimplifying this for people that have not had a lot of statistics. The R squared value roughly measures how well this equation fits your data. Okay, without going into a lot more detail than that, that should get us kind of in the ballpark. The R squared value is going to be a maximum of 1. So 1 means it perfectly fits your data. Anything greater than about 0.7 means that there's correlation. But notice that this data here doesn't really look linear. Maybe it looks a little more logarithmic. So notice what happens there, right? So that looks a little better, or maybe it's some kind of a polynomial, right? And well, maybe it's second order, but maybe it's a higher order. Maybe it's a third order. And notice what happens to that R squared value. You can try different models and see which one gives you a better R squared value, and that will give you a better description, potentially a better description of or prediction of where you would be within that data. Okay. If you had to do the mathematics associated with doing this by hand, even for just the simple linear model, for 15 data points is a lot of calculations to try to generate this equation by hand. Excel does it effortlessly. Very, very powerful tool. It's worthwhile to show it to you. Okay. All right. So that is the basics then for XY scatter graphs. And I think I'm going to stop recording there on this video, and we'll pick up the other videos. On the next video, we'll talk about the other types of graphs.